I was one of those people. Hell, I actually went to a black preschool that was at a historically black college. So for a while, I didn't have anything but black friends. So I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm just saying that it's not likely. There was a study several years ago found that 75% of white people said that they had many black friends. Many, for real. Do y'all know what many means? If you wanted to say you had one black friend, which I might almost believe, you would have said a. If you wanted to say you had two black friends, which is pushing it, but all right, I'll cut you slack. I'll assume you're not lying. You would have said a couple. If you wanted to say three, and now I just don't believe you at all, you're saying a few. So when you say many, you just said you had four or more black friends each. For real? 75% of white folks, four or more black friends each? Let's do the math. Let's do the math. The year that survey came out, there were 75% of white folks was 145 million white people. That's a lot of white people. 145 million white people who say they have four or more black friends each. And there were only 35 million black people to go around that year. I'm not good at math, but I think we have a problem, right? If you have 145 million white people who say they have four or more black friends each and there are only 35 million black people to go around, somebody is lying, or some of y'all black folks are incredibly busy running from white person house to white person house to white person house, hanging out with us so you can be our friends and make us answer this survey dishonestly. I'm just saying, I don't really believe it. I'm not even sure why I went there. That's not even in my damn outline. I'm not even sure where that came from. That's like from an old talk that I gave years ago. I just felt like it. I was just in the mood for it, right? So my point being, we get stuck in that commemoration mode. We're looking backward. We're not focusing on what is ahead of us. And I think it's very dangerous to do that, right? To get locked into that mode of thinking, my God, look how far we've come. Oh my God, we have a black president, everything's cool. I remember getting an email the day after the election of Barack Obama. Some of y'all might have gotten this same kind of email, or you might have had a conversation sort of similar to this one. Right? This guy writes me this email. I mean, it wasn't even 6 a.m. yet, man. And I had been up all night watching election returns like a lot of people. You know, it was late. I was in bed at like 2 o'clock, but I couldn't sleep. Woke up like 6, and there it was, right? I knew it was going to be crazy, too, because it was all capital letters and red font. Pro tip, just for y'all tonight, like if I piss you off, and I probably will, at least some of you, and you want to write to me about it, just take the cap lock off. You don't have to scream at me. You don't have to yell in capital letters and red font. Black font will be fine. I'll be more likely to respond to you. But this guy just like wrote this angry, unhinged email, and it started off with, ha, 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 ha. Why? Why you have to laugh at me at 6 in the morning? I don't even know you. And he's screaming at me. And he's like, see, now you're going to have to find a new hustle, because we have a black president. So now all y'all that do anti-racism work, you have to find a new hustle. Because that's exactly what this is a hustle, right? Because the most obvious thing to do when you're 22, 23 years old trying to figure out what you want to do with your life, right? And you're thinking, what's my hustle going to be? How am I going to get rich and famous and powerful in America? Oh, I know. Let's just fight white supremacy, because that shit always works out well, right? Yeah, that's the clear path to fame and fortune. It's not dangerous at all. Just do that, right? But that's what he was saying, right? That those of us who do civil rights work, anti-racism work, that we have to pretty much find a new line of work. Because obviously you can't have a racism problem if there's a man of color in the White House, except of course you can, because I'm assuming all the women in this room know that just because Benazir Bhutto, a woman, was elected not once, but twice in Pakistan did not eliminate patriarchy and misogyny in Karachi. I assume you know that the election of women as heads of state in Israel, India, Great Britain, the Philippines, and Ireland, in addition to Pakistan, did not end sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, or rape culture in those places. But we act like somehow the elevation of an individual of color in a country that was previously so intently set on white supremacy somehow proves the death of white supremacy. That doesn't mean that any more than those women's elevation in those places proved the end of sexism. But we act like it did. Or people will say things like, well, it's not that racism is dead. It's just we really shouldn't talk about it. I've been led to believe there might be certain folks here at the University of Dubuque for whom that is the operative opinion. Well, you know, it's not that it's not out there, it's just we shouldn't talk about it. You talk about it, you make it worse. Folks actually believe that who were at a university? How'd y'all get into college? I'm just being honest. I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm just saying, like, if you actually think that talking about social problems makes them worse, I'm really sort of worrying about your academic qualifications. Right? I'm just being honest with you. I'm not pulling any punches. Like, if you actually think that talking about social problems makes them worse, why don't we test that theory? It's real easy to test. So let's pretend I wasn't here to talk about racism and white supremacy. Let's pretend I was here to talk about world hunger. And let's say that I started off my talk by mentioning that there are probably, 1.5 billion, 2 billion people in this world who are starving right now for lack of adequate nutrition. Who the hell among you is going to jump out of your seat and be like, shh, don't talk about that, fool. If you talk about world hunger, children will die. That's how that works. You say it and they die. On the other hand, if you would just stop talking about that, food would magically appear on their plates because it's a miracle, right? Who the hell would say? Nobody would say that. But that's what we do about racism. Well, if you talk about it, it just makes it worse. That's like blaming the speedometer on your car for the speeding ticket that you just got. The speedometer didn't cause you to go 80 and a 65. It just transmitted certain information to you. That's all we're trying to do with this dialogue and this discussion. It's all the BSU's trying to do with the discussion about whiteness and the problematizing of whiteness. The conversation didn't cause the problem. The problem necessitated the conversation. So let's not get it backwards, right? But apparently, as a country, we're not ready for that. So we keep doing commemorations. We don't look forward. But there are a couple things we have to look forward about, in part because the civil rights movement, as important as it was, and as much as we must remember it as such, there were a couple things that it didn't really address, right? If you think about it, what did the civil rights movement focus on, right? Focused on, let's say early on, focused on desegregation of schools, so educational equity, right? Getting rid of separate but equal, particularly in regard to schooling. Then it turned its attention to public accommodations, lunch counters, hotels, restaurants, etc. Then it turned its attention to employment, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, equal opportunity in jobs, right? Then it turns its attention to what? Voting rights and the ability of folks to be able to vote and have the franchise in places where they had been denied the franchise. And then a couple years later starts to turn to housing, right? And the Fair Housing Act gets passed in 1968. So you've got education, public accommodation, employment, voting, and housing. Now, even in those areas, let's be honest, the civil rights movement, though it made major progress and was able to get laws passed to address discrimination in those areas, let's be honest, it hasn't worked. At least not the way we would like. Just like we have laws against robbery, folks are going to get jacked tonight. We have laws against murder, people get killed all the time. We have laws against sexual assault. We have laws against carjacking. Those things still happen. We have laws against petty theft. It still happens. Same thing is true here. We have laws that essentially outlaw discrimination in employment, but according to research by Alfred and Ruth Blumrosen several years ago, we know there are about 1 million cases a year, estimated lowball estimate, of race-based and gender-based job discrimination every year, both of which are outlawed by the Civil Rights Act in 1964. So just because you got a law doesn't mean it goes away. We have a Fair Housing Act for the last 47 years, passed in 1968, the year that I was born, and yet all of these years later, the best estimates we have are that, again, the lowball estimate is that perhaps 2 million times a year, people of color are subjected to differential and discriminatory treatment in housing, whether we're talking about rental units or whether we're talking about mortgage rates, interest rates offered by banks, etc. So that stuff still happens even though you got a law, right? We have a Voting Rights Act. We have people trying to repeal it essentially right now. I'll come back to that in a few minutes, right? So just because you have laws in place, we have technically the desegregation of schools and the end of separate but equal, but what do we know? We know that the overwhelming number of schools throughout the country now are starting to resegregate, right? People of color disproportionately in schools that are almost entirely folk of color, white folks in schools that are disproportionately, if not almost entirely white, and the schools that serve children of color are 10 times more likely to be places of concentrated poverty. So the idea that the Brown versus Board of Education decision and all the laws that came after that actually did away with separate but unequal is nonsensical. The evidence says that very little changed. Those schools that serve people of color are far less likely to have the most qualified and experienced teachers. They're far less likely to have honors classes, advanced placement classes, far less likely to have the most advanced curriculum, right? So Even in those areas where the movement focused attention, we still have a lot of work to do. But there are two areas where the movement didn't really focus at all. And this is not meant as a criticism against them. You have to pick your battles in certain times and places, so I get it, right? You try to move incrementally through certain arenas, and I understand why they did that. But the problem is, because they did not address these two areas that I want to mention to you tonight, those areas are today perhaps the least affected by the civil rights movement that we remember, the least affected by the movement that we're commemorating 50 years later, right? Those two areas are the areas of wealth, right? Not just income and occupational status and jobs, but actual wealth accumulation. Wealth, much more important to cementing one's opportunity in the world than just income. Anybody can have a job that pays a decent income, but if you don't actually have assets, if you don't have the ability to build assets, the ability to pass that down to your children, the ability to actually have the power to start your own business or fund your children's college education becomes far less. And then the second arena, the criminal justice system, right? An area that was focused very little, if at all, upon by the civil rights movement. Let's deal with those one at a time. Wealth. So here's an interesting fact. In 1865, right at the end of the Civil War, right after the emancipation of African peoples from enslavement, black folk in this country owned half of 1%, 0.5% of all the land in the United States. Half of 1%. By 1990, and still today, it hasn't changed since 1990, black folks own 1% of all the land in the United States. Now, I suppose if you're being particularly optimistic, you might say to yourself, well, I can look at that as a major progress. Black folks' share of the overall land of the U.S. has doubled. See, you say it like that, it sounds really good, right? Black folks' share of land has doubled. But when you realize it's a doubling from 0.5% to 1%, that's not so impressive anymore, right? And particularly when you consider that black folk, I'm pretty sure, did more than 1% of the work in this country. I'm fairly confident black folk did more than 1% of the labor in this country, but they have 1% of the land in this country. Right now, the typical white family in America has 20 times the net worth of the typical black family, 18 times that of the typical Latino family, 60% more than the typical Asian American or Pacific Islander family. That's not because we worked harder. Hell, back in the day, white folks prided ourselves on not working at all. I'm from the South. My people had a whole goal in mind. You know what our goal was? To sit on the porch and drink mint juleps and sweet tea and not have to work at all because we could get black folk to do the actual labor for us. That was how we rolled. We believed that they should do the hard work, and if you worked hard, you were nothing but a slave. And so ultimately, you had a bunch of rich white folks, the biggest, laziest slackers in the history of the universe, sitting up on the porch saying that black people were lazy. Wow, let that roll around in your head for a minute. People that prided themselves on not working. In my new book, which will be out in a couple of months, I have a quote from one of these wealthy planters in South Carolina where he said after the abolition of enslavement and the end of the Civil War, when he was going to have to actually work himself, when he wasn't going to be able to get black folks to do it for him, he said, "I've never done a hard day of work in my life and I don't know where to begin." So sorry for you. But of course, we then extrapolate the stereotype. So black folk are the ones that don't work. White folk are the ones that work so hard. Now, how did that 20-to-1 wealth gap happen if it wasn't hard work? Because it wasn't that. It wasn't that white folks prayed harder. It's not because white folks have some superior investment wisdom. I mean, hell, if y'all hadn't paid any attention to the Wall Street meltdown of the last 6 or 7 years, at least learn this. A handful of rich white dudes can lose a hell of a lot of money. And they can do it without any help from black people. They can do it without any help from Mexicans, be they documented or not. No Asian American folk, no indigenous people, right? Just a handful of the richest, smartest, highest SAT having white people on the planet with MBAs and all that from the Wharton School, whatever the hell that's worth, right? And I know people get upset when I mention the Wall Street criminals were white. They get upset at me. They say things like, you know, Tim, you really shouldn't talk about them being white. That's sort of racist. It's not racist. It's descriptive, right? And if they'd been black, y'all would have noticed. If a handful of black folks had just jacked $12.5 trillion of other people's money. That's what was lost in 18 months between the end of 2007 and the middle of 2009. $12.5 trillion lost by rich white men, either because they were incompetent as hell or they were criminal as hell. Not one of them went to jail, of course, because you can lose $12.5 trillion if you're a white male, you don't get locked up. If you steal $100 worth of food stamp benefits and you're a black woman, you're going away for 10 years in this country. That's real, right? And so people get mad when you mention they were white, but if they were black, white folks would have been like this. They would have said, well, how did these black people get these jobs on Wall Street anyway? They clearly weren't qualified, as evidenced by their incompetence. I bet they got these jobs because of affirmative action. They had to hire them just because they're black. You know, that's how it works nowadays. Black people are taking all the jobs. Okay, time out. Here's my question for you, and I'd really like an answer. Where in the hell are these jobs that black people are taking from white people? Are these jobs in Second Life? Is this like some Minecraft shit? Like, where are these jobs that black people are supposedly stealing from white people? Because I cannot find them in the real world. When you actually compare unemployment rates between white people and anybody else, even when you look at people with the same qualifications, the same amount of education, the same amount of experience, oddly enough, people of color still 70% to 2 times as likely to be unemployed. So I guess they're not really taking white people's jobs. And by the way, I don't ask much from racists. I've learned not to. I've learned to have incredibly low intellectual standards and hurdles for people who are racist. But here's my advice. If you're going to be one, all I ask is that you be consistent. It seems like a fair argument. I just want no moving targets. Here's what I need. I need people to pick their prejudice. You cannot say on the one hand that black and brown folks take all the jobs, and then out of the other side of your mouth say that black and brown folks are lazy and don't want to work. You got to pick one. You see what I'm saying? Because if you're lazy, I don't think you took all the jobs. Hell, I don't think you probably even took one job if you're really lazy. And if you took all the jobs, you're like the opposite of lazy. So we can't have this moving target. I just want you to pick one nonsensical argument, which is easy to defeat, because when you pick 2, see, it makes my job too difficult, and I just don't have enough time, and I don't feel like messing with it. So it seems fair. I'm just saying, let's be consistent, right? So that 20-to-1 wealth gap, it's not about effort. It's not about intelligence. It's not about investment wisdom. There are right now 37 people in this country who have the same amount of wealth as the poorest 157 million people. Do you really think there are 37? And that means a lot of us white folk too. See, it's not just black folk, right? A lot of us white folk can't even compare to these 37 people. So do you really think there are 37 people in this country who actually are that much smarter than the bottom half of America? You really think there are 37 people who work that much harder? There are only 24 hours in a day, 7 days in a week, even for rich folks. It's not like they have their own personal wormhole that they can crawl into where time stands still, and then they shoot out the back of the wormhole and they've done like 1,000 hours a week when you could only do 40 or so, right? So this idea that the rich, the 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune, just to put this in perspective so white folks understand, this isn't even just about white and black. This is about wealthy people and the rest of us, right? And how we get jacked around by this system of inequality. The 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune, 5 of whom just happened to get born into the family. Boy, I bet that took work. Boy, they must have worked hard to get born into the Walton family. My goodness. And then the other of whom married into the damn family and her husband died. And now she's an heir to the Walmart fortune. 6 of them. The 6 of them have the same collective net worth as the poorest 40% of this country. They have so much money. Just to put this in perspective for a minute, keeping in mind that the average Walmart employee gets paid sub-poverty wages. Keeping in mind that the average Walmart employee is actually having to turn to food stamp, or what we now call SNAP benefits, just to supplement their pathetic wages for this multi-billion-dollar company, the wealthiest in the country. The biggest group of SNAP beneficiaries, food stamp beneficiaries in just about any community are people who work at Walmart. They're having to do food drives at Thanksgiving to raise money to allow their employees to buy turkeys for Thanksgiving because they pay them sub-poverty wages. So just keep that in mind for a minute. And then think about this. The 6 heirs to the Walmart fortune have so much money that they could, if they wanted to, just the 6 of them, they could buy every house in Seattle, every single house, every single condo, every single townhome, and they would still have $40 billion left, which would allow them to buy every house in Napa, California, if they are wine people, or they could buy every house in Anaheim if they just love Disney, right? Or if they don't like Seattle, they could buy every home in Miami. They could buy every home in DC. They could buy every home in Dallas. They have so much money that if you took all the other really rich people that you think are rich and put them together, they'd still have more. More than Mark Zuckerberg, right? More than the founder of Starbucks, more than Jeff Bezos, who founded Amazon, more than Mark Cuban, the owner of the Mavericks, more than Jerry Jones, the owner of the Cowboys, more than Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. You take all these people, the founder of Nike, Phil Knight, put them all together, and they still have like 3 times more than all those people put together. Oh, and it's funny, when we talk about race, everybody wants to talk about Oprah. What about Oprah? What about Oprah? She's really rich. What about Oprah? Here's the deal. Oprah, you think she's rich? She has enough money that if she wanted to, she could buy all the houses too. You know where? Not Seattle, not Dallas, not Miami, not DC. She could buy all the houses in Mokina, Illinois, wherever the hell that is. That's how rich she is and how rich she is not. She's the richest black person in the United States. Right now, there are 400 white people in the United States of America that collectively have more wealth than all 40 million African Americans put together. Let me say it again. 400 white people, the same collective wealth, $2.3 trillion. That is the same amount as is owned and controlled by all black folks combined. If you believe that there are 400 white people who have worked as hard as 40 million black people, you need to quit college. You need to ask your parents, if they're paying for it, to stop because they're wasting their money. And if me as a taxpayer, if I'm paying for it, I'm asking you to stop. Just being honest now. We got to have some critical thinking, and there's a problem that our default position in this country is to assume that that's normal. See, and the civil rights laws don't get at that. Because the civil rights laws only look at deliberate discrimination. How did that 20-to-1 wealth gap happen? Real simple. Certain people had a head start. When you've had a head start, you get to accumulate stuff and you get to pass that stuff down. If I've had a 5-lap head start in an 8-lap race, I'm across the finish line first. That's how that works. Doesn't mean I was a faster runner. Doesn't mean I was more committed to my sport. It just means that I had a head start. Right? So if folks have had a head start, they're able to accumulate. And see, the deal is, white folks were allowed to accumulate stuff when people of color were not. In 1862, President Lincoln and Congress passed the Homestead Act, right? What did that do? It opened up like 245 million acres of essentially free land. Guess to whom? White people. Guess what? In states like Iowa and all around the country, particularly west of the Mississippi, though not exclusively so. 245 million. So a lot of folks that got farms and ranches got that because of the loving hand of the government. It wasn't because of the free market. It wasn't because they were harder working. It's because the government said, we will set aside 10 acres for you, or 50 acres, or 120 acres, up to 120 acres for like $10. But if you were black, or if you were Mexican and that used to be your land and they kicked you off of it, or if you were indigenous to this continent and they stole that land from you, you weren't getting any of that. So see, government made that possible, right? But these are the same folks who'll say, I never got anything from government. Yeah, except the farm, except the ranch, except the GI Bill that you got after World War II that GIs of color were routinely denied benefits from, other than the FHA loan that the government also created starting in 1934 and which whites were able to access when people of color could not for like 30 years. Other than all of those things, you never got anything from government. See, we've all benefited from the intervention by the government in the market, but only some people are honest enough to own it. And a lot of other folks have been encouraged to believe, oh no, I did it all on my own. Nobody did it all on, unless you were raised on an island by wolves, you didn't do it alone. Right? And none of us were. We all had help, and we didn't earn any of that help. I remember having a conversation with a young man, 16, at a prep school in Massachusetts several years ago, right? And he said, I'd given a talk about, sort of similar, we're talking about white privilege and racism, and he got real pissed, and after about 30 minutes, we did the Q&A, and he said, are you telling me that the only reason I'm at this college, at this high school is because I'm white? I'm like, no, man, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm sure you worked hard. I'm sure you earned your way in. It's all good. I'm not mad at you at all. And he said, well, I just want to make sure because, my dad worked really hard. My dad worked 50 hours a week. We grew up poor. My father didn't even go to college. He barely finished high school. He worked in the mills for 50 hours a week. And he went on and on and on about his dad and how hardworking his dad was. And when he was done, I said to him, okay, number one, your dad sounds amazing, right? Honestly, like your dad sounds incredible. I didn't have that dad, man. My dad was an alcoholic and an addict. So I really respect that you had that father. And I hope that you really are grateful. You sound grateful and you should be grateful because that sounds like an incredible man. And I'm really glad you had that. But here's my problem. And I don't mean any offense by this is what I said to him. I said, here's the problem. I don't know what that has to do with you. You're 16. You have done nothing but get born to that man. And unless you believe that you earned that in a past life, and this was a Catholic school, so I knew he wasn't going to say yes, then the fact that your father worked really hard means one thing and one thing only. St. John's Prep in Danvers, Massachusetts should immediately admit your father as a student in the high school. But not you unless you believe that you're somehow entitled to take it. Because how is that any more just than the government intervening to help you? Just because you got born to the right family, how is that justice? It's not. There's no philosophical principle upon which you can hang that as being earned or entitled or justified, but that's what we do. So this wealth disparity is a real problem because what it means is certain people, regardless of their own effort, will continue to be ahead. And other people, regardless of their own effort, will continue to lag behind. And that creates all kinds of problems because it means that people of color are less likely to be able to start their own businesses, less likely to be able to afford, whether it's health care or college education for their children. So ultimately, we just end up perpetuating injustice, even if we close the gaps in terms of income, which we've done to some extent, not enough. We've done it a little bit. Those problems remain. So we have to talk about that. We got to really talk about what it means that certain people have had a head start in the accumulation of stuff and other people have been left out. Secondly, criminal justice system. Here's the deal. Civil rights movement didn't touch this. In 1964, 2/3 of all the people locked up in this country when the Civil Rights Act was passed were white, and 1/3 were people of color. Today, 2/3 are people of color and 1/3 are white. Now, there are only two possible explanations for this phenomenon. One, I suppose, is that sometime around 1965, white folks woke up from some deep criminal slumber in which we had been ensconced and said, oh my God, we have been committing all of this crime. What is wrong with us? Holy hell, we should really stop. And then black folk, hearing the news that we had retired from crime, were like, well, hell, if they're not going to do it, we'll just get in there and do it because somebody has to do crime. Shit, it might as well be us. Right? I suppose that's possible, except it's not true. And if you don't believe me, consult your local criminologist, and they will tell you what is indisputably the fact, which is that the share of crime done by white folks as a share of overall crime did not budge significantly in that period. The share of crime done by black folks as a percentage of all crime did not budge significantly in that period. The share of crime done by Latino folk as a percentage of overall crime did change because the demographics of Latinos changed, but not substantially enough to justify that shift. What happened is that the resources of the justice system were disproportionately deployed in black and brown space as opposed to white space, particularly with regard to, though not exclusively with regard to, the war on drugs, which is the most misnamed war in history because it had nothing to do with drugs. How do we know that? Because if the war on drugs were about drugs, you'd go where the drugs are, but that's not what we do. See, here's the reality counter to the stereotype. People believe, apparently, according to the research, that black folk and brown folk are more likely to use drugs, more likely to possess drugs, and more likely to sell them, but there is zero evidence for that, none. The evidence actually says that people of color and white folks are equally likely to use, equally likely to possess, and equally likely to distribute and sell illegal narcotics. Among people 18 to 25, white folks are actually more likely to do so. All right? But what's the stereotype? And then what gets played out on the street in terms of who gets arrested? Now see, there's national data and then there's Iowa. Why don't we talk about Iowa for a minute? Right? The national stuff is bad enough. National stuff, People of color getting arrested 4 or 5 times worse, more often per capita than white folks for drugs. In Iowa, last time I looked at the numbers, it was 9 times more likely. Iowa is either Iowa or Minnesota. Sometimes you're number one, and I'm just making fun of y'all because I'm in Tennessee. So when it comes to everything else, it's us in Mississippi. You know what I'm saying? I just have to tell you, when y'all are at the bottom, I'm going to call it out because it happens to me all the time. Iowa and Minnesota are the ones that are constantly fighting to be the worst when it comes to racial disparity and incarceration. 9 times more likely to be incarcerated for a drug offense if you're black in this state than if you're white. That's not because black folks are 9 times more likely to use, possess, or sell drugs. They're not even 1% more likely. They're equally likely to use, possess, and sell, but 9 times more likely, that's 800% more likely to be incarcerated on a drug-related offense. Nationwide, 4 times more likely black and brown folks to be arrested for weed, even though white folks smoke weed just as often. In fact, here's the deal. Let's just forget the statistics. I know that's interesting for some people. Y'all might be writing that down, or I hope you remember it. That's cool. It's good data. You get in a debate, you can use that, whatever. But it's not even the point, right? The numbers don't even matter. I knew that the war on drugs wasn't about drugs before I ever looked at the data. How did I know that? Simple. From personal experience. And I can tell you this now because the statute of limitations has expired on that shit, see? So I can just own it. Right? If the war on drugs were about drugs, I don't really know who'd be giving this talk to you, but I know it wouldn't be me because they don't let you Skype in a lecture from prison. And that's where I'd be if the war on drugs were really about drugs. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm not trying to encourage drug use. Just say no. Just say no. Don't do it. Don't do it. And my asthma came back, so I can't do it anymore. So don't even ask. I don't have any. I'm not carrying. I got nothing. Right? I'm just saying. Right? Those of us who are white know that we can push that envelope of illegality, that we can get away with things and never be suspected. When I was in college in New Orleans in 1986 and 1990, my freshman year, we lived on a dorm hall at Tulane, where I was in school. There were 2 black guys on the hall, one of whom smoked weed, one of whom didn't. Right? But even the one that smoked weed didn't want to hang out with us when we were smoking because he was too afraid he was going to go to jail. Right? Because we were crazy about the way we would smoke weed. White folks apparently so privileged, we can't just smoke a joint. Oh, no. We can't just do that. We got to have high technology. We got to have all kinds of crazy stuff. We got to have 3-foot bongs because, a weed would not get you high enough if it was just a joint. You can't do that. You can't have a blunt. That's not even big enough. You got to have 3 chambers of glass. And then you have to attach a damn gas mask to the 3 chambers. So we had a gas mask that we got at the Army surplus store, we were in a chemical warfare zone, and we were attaching that with some damn duct tape to the 3 feet of bong chamber so that we could now have 4 feet of bong chamber so we could get really high. And you can imagine the black dude on the hall was like, what in the hell are y'all doing? I don't even want to be in the dorm when y'all are getting high, because if they come, they will arrest me. I will go to jail. Y'all will go to rehab. My mom will kill me. You'll be back in college in 3 months. Right? So we knew that we could get away with things that they could not, because the war on drugs is not about drugs. It's about control of certain populations. It is about enforcing the law one way for some and not the same way for others. And it's not just drugs. Hell, I remember living in New Orleans during that time after I graduated from college. I was living in a house with a bunch of folk, and 2 things happened in the course of 2 weeks that really demonstrated the disparity of the system, right? So one day, this was the year after I graduated, but I was still dating a woman who was a senior in college up at Tulane. So one afternoon, I was getting ready to go pick her up, and we were going to go to lunch. And I went out to get in the car, which was her car. She lived with me and all these folks in this big house. And I was going to go pick her up, so I tried to get into the car, and I realized I locked my keys in there. I'm like, damn. So, man, I got 10 minutes to get up there, and I locked myself out. The keys are right there. I can see them, but I don't have a spare set. So I run back into the house to get a coat hanger, because back in the day, the old cars, they had the little button. You could just pull it up with a coat hanger. Now I know it's all on the door, but y'all just have to trust me, the younger folk in the room, right? So you could put a coat hanger in there, and you could pull it up, and you could get in. So I tried. I kept pushing it in. I could not get it to come up. All of a sudden, a cop rolls up, white cop, New Orleans Police Department, jumps out. Now, freeze the image just for a minute. What would be, the logical thing for an officer to say when he's just come upon a young man, 23 years old, clearly trying to break into a vehicle? That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to break into a vehicle. He has no idea if it's my vehicle. He has no idea. The first thing you might ask is this your car? And can you prove that it's your car, that you have some legal right to be trying to enter this vehicle. Can I see your identification? Can I see the license? Can I see the registration, the title, whatever else, right? He doesn't ask any of that. He gets out of the car. He says, hey, what's going on here? I said, well, I locked myself out of the car. I'm trying to get up to pick up my girlfriend up at class. She's getting out in about 5 minutes. And instead of asking me for any proof, he looks at me and he says, well, you're doing that wrong. I was like, doing what wrong? Trying to steal a car? Like, as far as you know, I'm stealing this car. What do you mean I'm doing it wrong? He says, yeah, that's no way to break into a car. Let me show you the right way to break into a car. He then goes to his trunk. He pulls out a long metal rod called the Slim Jim. He tries to break in that way through the door frame. He too cannot get into the car because apparently, little side note worthy of mention, the 1988 Toyota Tercel is the hardest vehicle in automotive history into which you might break, which is totally ironic because it is also the last car in the history of the car that you would ever want to steal. It's like the ugliest damn car ever. But if you did want to steal it, you're not stealing it. They're not making it possible. No cop and not me. You can't get in, by God. So he couldn't get in. Now he's frustrated. He looks at me and says, let's just throw a rock through the window. I'm like, wait, hold it, what? So first he's trying to tell me to steal it, essentially, as far as he knows. Now he's encouraging vandalism. And he says, yeah, let's just throw a rock. I'm like, I can't throw a rock through the window. It's my girlfriend's car. She'll kill me. He's like, don't worry about it. Just tell her somebody tried to break in. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to tell her that you, a cop, tried to break in. How about that? Right? White privilege. 2 weeks later, same neighborhood, one of my roommates, black guys, walking home from a concert, right? And he's about 2 blocks away from our house. Cops roll up on him, get out of the car, guns drawn, and they ask him if he's the one who just mugged the white woman down the street. He says, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. I didn't touch anybody. I just coming back from a show. You can see I don't have her purse because apparently this woman had her purse stolen. It's like, what the hell, he mouthed off to him, but he's like, what the hell, leave me alone. I didn't take anything. They come and try to grab his shoulder. He goes like that, right? Not saying that's a good move. Not saying I encourage that move, but come on, seriously, they're trying to put their hands on him for a crime he didn't commit. They then, because he does this, they take him, they shove him into the car, they crack his head open on the door frame, starts bleeding blood all over his shirt. They take him 3 blocks away, take him to the white woman to do an instant lineup on the street. This is entirely improper and probably illegal. They take him down there. They pull him out of the car. They hold him up by the shirt right in front of this white woman, and they say, is this the guy? And to her credit, she looks at him and says, no, it's not even close. Doesn't look anything like him. Not the same height, not the same build, not the same color. This particular roommate was lighter. She's like, no, it was a guy who was a little bit darker. He didn't have those clothes on. Doesn't look anything like him. The cops look at her again, still holding his shirt, and they say, are you sure this isn't him? And she said, yeah, I told you, it's not him. It's not even remotely close to him. Ma'am, could you look one more time and make sure that this is not the guy that mugged you? And she said, I'm telling you, the last time, this is not him. They then proceed, without saying a word, see, they're trying to set him up. They're clearly trying to frame this kid. They take him, they throw him back in the car, they start driving him downtown to the station. He says, where are we going? They said, we're arresting you. He says, for what? You heard the woman. I didn't touch her. And they said, we're taking you in for resisting arrest because of this, right? And they say, see, your parents, your family really should have taught you respect for law enforcement. And he says, well, that's really funny that you mentioned that because my uncle was the first black detective in the history of the New Orleans Police Department. So I think I got that memo. And they said, really, who's your uncle? And he told them, and they swerved to the side of the road, and they let his ass out. Made him walk home, though, and he came in with blood all over his clothing. See, that's the difference within a 2-week period. Right? White dude, for all they know, breaking in, stealing a car. They're helping me take it, for all they know. Black dude just walking home while black is accused of mugging somebody and is about to be arrested for a crime that he did not commit. So you see, again, we can look at all the studies and the research and the data. Sometimes we don't even have to do that. Let's talk about what's going on right now, though, right? Because it's not just the drug war. disproportionate incarceration for narcotics. We see right now that every week in this country, 2 black folks, mostly men, sometimes women as well, Rekia Boyd, Catherine Johnston, and others, being shot and killed, unarmed, unthreatening to law enforcement, nonetheless being killed by cops and or security guards and or wannabe cops like George Zimmerman, right? Speaking of whom, can we just have a moment here about George Zimmerman, who so many white folks apparently believed that Trayvon was the aggressor, Trayvon was the dangerous one, Trayvon was the violent one, Trayvon was the criminal, and now George Zimmerman has damn been arrested 3 times since he was acquitted for beating up girlfriends. Every time the charges get dropped, this guy's like a cat with 9 lives. He has not been caught yet, but I'm telling you, keep paying attention. One of these days he's gonna kill a white person, and I promise you he will go to prison for that. This is somebody with a history of violence, with a history of aggression. We still have people defending him, throwing stuff at his girlfriends, beating up his girlfriends, pulling guns on girlfriends, but Trayvon was the dangerous one. Yeah, keep telling yourself that, right? So 2 black folks a week being killed unarmed by law enforcement or wannabe law enforcement. Black men 21 times according to the FBI data, and it's incomplete. It could be worse than this for all we know. 21 times more likely than white men to be killed by cops. Not because black men commit crime 21 times more often than white men. That isn't the case, not even close. Not because black men are 21 times more likely to act